So let me begin by saying that I'm not an expert the way you guys are. You've been studying this field for a long time and you know far more than I do, but I'm going to try to give you a perspective that's coming from uh, my personal experience and a ufological experience about trying to decipher the clues around gravity control based on um, the evidence that I've seen and so forth. And so that's what my focus is, or what I'm trying to share with you today. And so the next slide captures sort of what my father did. This is sort of the introduction to my world. Is that I'm 13 years old, um, and my dad tells me that. Hey, I'm working on anti-gravity at Douglas Aircraft Company. Um, and he convinced his management to give him, 600K back then, which is like 4.5 million today, to do, interview abductees, to set up a Michelson-Morley interferometer and try to change the speed of light, to um, work on a whole host of um, physics experiments, the theoretical stuff as well as practical stuff, to try to figure out how gravity works. And this all started for him um, when he was at a meeting with his management, and they said, "Well, Bob, what are you doing for fun nowadays?" And he said, "Well, I've read 50 UFO books, and there's only one question left." And he said, "Well, what's that?" He said, "Are we going to figure out how this works before or after Lockheed does?" And that was the start of his funding for this, and his push into a deeper understanding of ufology. Um, and and you can see him. General Schriever is up with the missiles above, and my dad on the left in 1974, and then my dad 6 months ago, well, 9 months ago or so, at 96 in Newport Beach with me. um, there are links that I can provide to the 157 pages of material related to Douglas Aircraft Company's gravity research and theoretical research. Um, and it's interesting, but it's history, and I'm not sure that I have not fully mined it for insights, other than putting it in my AI ufologist AI GPT, gravity GPT as data. Why don't you go to the next slide there? Um, just again, as fun. This is 1974 for me. I'm a senior in high school, and I set up a Michelson-Morley interferometer with a little magnetic field, trying to change the speed of light and try to look at fringe shifts on a pool table in Newport Beach. But I did enter the science fair and won first prize at the Orange County Science Fair. Um, but that's sort of my early indoctrination. I was uh, 19 years old there. At that time, 18, 19, I think. Uh, and that was my genesis. And then I sort of ignored it, other than ufology, until last year, and started to get more serious. Go to the next slide, um, about ufology, or not ufology, but anti-gravity. So one of the first interesting things is this guy, Dudley Bowen Clark. So out in the desert in 1951, he had, you know, $6 million down a dirt road with contracts with the Atomic Energy Commission and Navy and Signal Corps, working on an gravity insulator. So that was what his team was working on. And I have a large file on him, and I've requested his FBI file. Um, but I find it very interesting that, here's the first thing that resonated with me. I mean, gravity control may have gone back to the Nazis and earlier, but for me at this time, I'm thinking that this is sort of the origin point of progress. Next slide. Um, Did you get the next slide there, Tim? There we go. And here's the newspaper article that sort of talks about this in detail in 1951. Next slide. And then you may have seen this before, this New York Herald article where the guys at Convair and General Dynamics division were doing work in 55 on spinning magnets and spinning permanent magnets. Um, Maybe high speed, those look like air bearings, maybe, or you know, they're working on that sort of thing. And this is your sort of first clue that spinning magnetic fields is key to an understanding of how to break through gravity potentially. Um, Next slide. And then you may have all seen this picture of the G engines are coming in 56 in Young Men magazine. Um, and mentions of Glenn Martin, which we'll talk about more, and the other key people, including Clark Electronics Labs at the end. But I'll mention that this guy, Michael Gladwich, that wrote the article, was a World War II fighter ace in Poland, then France, then in the UK, and um, was injured, but very much plugged into the entire aerospace world in a detailed way in these 50s time frame, uh, and participated in a lot of behind the scenes meetings. And to my surprise, he wrote a book on Admiral Byrd on Antarctica. For those that are following the mysteries of aliens in Antarctica. Um, but I find that interesting as sort of a plausible connection. Um, Next slide. And here we get to the mother lode, in my opinion. This is the Glenn L. Martin starts this RIAS group. Walcom Bender was the leader at the time. Um, but he starts it in 55, and all these super powerful heavyweight theoretical physicists and mathematicians are working hard at trying to figure out um, gravity and gravity research. Lewis Witten has got videos about bismuth magnesium, and people recognize Rudolf Kalman for the electronic Kalman filters, but dot dot dot. I've requested FBI files on a lot of these people, and we'll talk more about George Trimble in a little bit, a few slides later, um, and his involvement with Lockheed Martin's. So in the next slide, we'll also talk about, in the 1960s, NEPA was canceled, nuclear propulsion aircraft. Why did they do it? Maybe they figured out gravity, or they decided, well, there's lots of potential reasons why you wouldn't want to have a flying nuke around. Um, but the newspaper articles on gravity stop, and there's the counterintelligence effort probably to squash them or not support them. Um, you know, NMR, nuclear magnetic resonance, is transitioned from sort of a pure research mode, which Asloff and others will highlight, to more technology focused, where let's just make an MRI machine to do something. And then, as Hal Puthoff and others, and Tim no doubt understands, that string theory kicks off in 68 as a potential cover story for how to push the mainstream physicists down a track that's a dead end or a mildly useful end. Um, anyway, I'm just sort of commenting on that. And the next slide. Um, and then you may have all heard about Ben Rich's efforts at the Lockheed Skunkworks for 15 years. But I'll pull you to the third bullet. Is that there's an error in the equations, and we figured it out, and we know how to travel to stars, and it won't take a lifetime. When I think error in the equations, I think these are human beings figuring out errors, and GR is not correct, and they fix that, or Maxwell's equations are not correct, or the combination of the two, or scalar functions are not correct somehow. And so they figured it out. And I don't think the ETs are giving them equations on a they wouldn't quote figure it out. They would just be given the equation. So anyway, I find that highly suggestive that it was us that figured out how gravity works, uh, rather than some sort of celestial gift from others. Next slide. I'll give my shameless plug for the second edition of Magic Eyes Only, which is on Amazon. It's got 104 UFO crash cases from around the world, and it's updated from my first edition, which was had 74. Um, but for those people that are interested in UFO crashes and some clues in physics, but not nearly as many as, say, Paul Hill's book, um, this is an interesting read. Next slide. So now I'll sort of talk about potential man-made anti-gravity crashes, or cases, excuse me. Um, and I'll have to credit Michael Schratt for his work on finding some of these and illustrating some of these, and highlighting the fact of their man-made nature. We'll talk a little bit about the Danielson, Connecticut case, and then the Eddie Laxton case, as well. So the next slide. So November 20th, 56, this woman stands outside. She's got this 25-foot cross craft with these very detailed drawings. These are drawings of these Tesla coil type tools. I mean, or propulsion systems. No sound, heat, smell, hovered, maneuvered. Um, it looks like insulators on transformers or Tesla coils and so forth. I just find it interesting that in my mind, this is another potential clue as to the nature of how gravity works, as well. Next slide. Tim, you there? Next slide. Ah, counter rotation. So that's another principle that I find interesting, is that there's several cases where you can clearly see both sides of the disk rotating in opposite directions in a counter rotation manner. And so that's the another interesting aspect or clue to the nature of gravity control, as well as this hum, this noise. Um, and this was investigated at very highest levels, military officers in New Zealand where it happened, as well as the US and so forth. So again, that's I think a fascinating other clue to the nature of how to do gravity control. Next slide. And now we come to the one where I'm sort of staking my position on, is this Eddie Laxton case, uh, in Temple, Oklahoma. So this is a um, Air Force electronics, like 15-year veteran, driving to work, rounds the bend, sees this craft parked in front of him with this huge electrostatic wick behind the back of it, and a man standing out in front. And he gets out of his car and walks towards the man, and the man notices him. He gets in, and they fire it up, and this low level hum starts, and he takes off flying away, um, very rapidly. And there was another witness to this effect, too. Uh, and the next slide shows his drawing, his firsthand drawing, showing a horizontal stabilizer on the rear, and then these lights, and this little standard fold down gangplank, and a human being. Um, and this is his firsthand drawing with the letters TL4768 on the you know uh, test lenticular device or something like that. Next slide. Uh, so. it's interesting, this is his comment. What I saw was definitely not from space. The man was wearing fatigues, had a hat, bill broken up, Air Force mechanics, common English letters on it. So, the next slide, he was clearly impressed that this was a human being. This is the Blue Book card um, that had multiple witnesses and a mention of this hum, this buzz that occurred as this craft lifted off. This and that humming whiz noise or increasing pitch has occurred in several cases. Next slide. So, so when I think about the problem, I think of, well, if this is working in 66, they had to have designed it in 64 or built it in 64. Maybe they figured out anti-gravity in 62 or earlier, or maybe this is one of earlier ones. So this is highly supportive of that. And you got to realize on the left, you got these are the technologies you got to work with. You've got to work with analog dials, you got low altitude operations, you got high power vacuum tubes, no advanced semiconductors, you got magnetics, you got electrostatics, you got magnetism, you got barium titanate, which is a capacitor, dielectric. Um, but you don't have some of the fancier stuff. You don't have any fiber optics or carbon fiber or GPS or squat. So you, you got to think in the mindset of we should be able to do gravity control using 1960 technology. Um, and it should be possible to do it that way. Next slide. And now I'll take you to the orange juicer with tentacles in you know, 67. So Bill is, watching television in his house, hears the dogs barking and goes outside, static electricity everywhere. His arms are all up and head, and he sees this craft with these electrostatic wick tentacles and these little uh, gooseneck spotlights coming out of the craft. And in the distance, he sees other craft hooked onto the high tension power line, glowing red, pulling power out. He sort of freaks out and gets his wife and kids, hops in the truck, drives to the neighbor's house, and then, um, uh, the neighbors and everybody watch it for a while, and then it all disappears. Uh, so again, electrostatic seems to be another key clue as to the nature of how to do gravity control, high electrostatic fields. Next slide. Another example in Venezuela where you it looks like those are flame jets, but there's sort of plasma glows of this man who's in his apartment looking out, 100 feet towards this craft, and this this sort of two hemispheres with electrostatic fields or lightning going back and forth between them. And so that's very interesting. And then the craft leaves, and another one shows up or nearby, identical in the same vein. So again, another example of potential man-made craft. Next slide. Or this one I'm less sure about, but it's the flying pyramid. And it's the motorcyclist, his motorcycle gets totally demagnetized, doesn't work anymore, he gets radiation sickness. um, but I just find it interesting in that, one of the ways to make an asymmetric capacitor is to do it with a pyramidal shape. You can do it with other shapes or geometries as well, but I find that interesting and suggestive, maybe not as strongly as many of the other cases. Next slide. And then up in Canada in 2013, we had this barbell UFO case where it's slowly rotating around the center axis, um, and emitting sort of electrical spark-like shower or plasma glow around it. And then, 6 minutes later, and a second craft, identical one, shows up. Two identical craft um, just seems you know, suspicious in my mind. But anyway, this is another potential interesting case that could be man-made. Um, Next slide. And then you get to the hunt for zero point. Many of your readers, and I think Tim, you've interviewed Nick maybe before a long time ago. Um, and the arch villain is this guy George Trimble, who worked at Lockheed Martin and refused to talk about his firsthand experience inside Lockheed Martin around presumably gravity control. Um, but the sort of summary of the book, in my mind, was that anti-gravity is bound up in counter rotation, torsional magnetic fields, or torsion and magnetic fields, zero point energy naturally, which is where the energy I think is coming from, nuclear spin, and electrostatics. There may be some more subtleties, but it's not just Nick Cook who couldn't get Trimble to talk. It was Tom Valone as well, and maybe others. But from my perspective, I want to interview Nick Cook or Trimble's kids and grandkids and find out what they have to say. Um, and I've filed for Trimble's FBI file as well, which will be interesting reading if it's blacked out, or doesn't exist, or what have you. So that's where I'm going with it. Next slide. And then many people may or may not know of Paul Hill's Unconventional Flying Objects book, Scientific Analysis. And he's a NASA engineer, collected all these case data around UFOs. And, these are the key attributes. No real surprises about the magnetic fields or electrostatic fields or, shapes, or high G turns like, or the Tic Tac videos or other videos that you saw on Skinwalker Ranch, or the high speed G turns with squishing people. We all know that's something that's not. It takes gravity manipulation or inertia control. Next slide. Um, So something else people probably don't know about is the Encyclopedia of Flying Saucers. This is original onion skin leaked document after 39 years. It says highest classification of the document, top secret magic. And um, what's interesting about this, besides some handwritten notes by Vannevar Bush and others, is the next slide, which uh, has this comment, um, uh, but to all these things, rule out the possibility that saucers are man-made. And the handwritten note is that uh, we should, this should not get out, is the key wording in ink by some military or scientist in the mid 60s saying, in a classified document, this should not get out. So implies in my mind another secondary source that we have anti-gravity technology in that time frame. Um, and we've done forensic testing of the ink and paper and pen marks and the top secret magic stamps and all that stuff. We can talk later about that. But next slide. And then, David Froning is mentioned in several articles about AFRL. What they want is proposals that focus on high voltage, high frequency electromagnetic field pulsations to induce mass fluctuations within electronic and ionic structure and dielectric materials. So that's where, you know, the sort of government military um, sort of wider world. I don't think this is the top secret people that know what's really going on, but that's where they think the answer lies. And I find that interesting. And I think I agree with them. I think that the answer lies to gravity control in those paragraph, and other things too. Next slide. So, this is the conundrum. Now what? And this is what I ask, so the only thing to do is to rediscover it and prove it in a credible, public, open way. Next slide. So that's what I'm focused on. I find this article interesting. Graham and Lawrence in 1980, they're sparring back and forth in Nature about, the predictions of different Minkowski tensors and Abraham tensors in all a credible way. Uh, and I think there's something to their debate back and forth as to being clues to the nature of what's really going on. Uh, Next slide. Um, and then, you guys may have looked at the Triode vacuum amplifier, um, and uh, the mysterious death around his involvement and various other people. What I took away from it, other than, here's another potential over unity device that's kind of intriguing, was the whole bifilar winding approach in in potentially a device. Um, but I think it's likely a dead end. People have tried it before and not made any progress. Um, but I'd be curious to hear what your opinion is, Tim. Um, and next slide. And then, Mad Markham, many of your audience may or may not have heard of Art Bell's. You can listen to this whole thing with his Jacob ladder and potential time machine and gravity manipulation. But what I took away from it is he's using high voltages, you know, 20 kilovolt, 3 megavolt, and electromagnets and vortexes um, so again, these are just sort of clues in my mind to something weird happened with this guy. And despite him going to jail and other baggage associated with his experience, but he got out. I mean, it was just for stealing transformers, but harmless crime in my mind. But anyway, the next slide. Um, is Boyd Bushman. He was interviewed in Nick Cook's book, um, but he has this north pole magnet test where you put two north poles and a north south pole and drop them off 4 stories, and the north falls at a different rate, and it's been repeated several times. And this is um, interesting in my mind in that it's a fundamental physics thing that's changed. There's a clue again about the nature of how to control gravity. I got his FBI is in hand, lots of anti-gravity mentions, but he also has a long interview about Area 51 and his comments that Richard Dolan did and others, which I sort of push off to the side and ignore. Um, but nevertheless, uh, I think the concept of this North Pole falling at different rates is another interesting clue. Next slide. And then you've interviewed Poklanoff and Ningley, and well, Ningley's dead, but the point is that there's a lot of interesting stuff in this. Ningley's FBI file is on its way to me. We'll find out the truth whether or not she was really escorted out of the country or left or not, um, and a lot more details about what really went on with her. Um, I did note that George Hathaway, did not see any effect repeating this experiment. Um, and Tor, or Ningley's partner, also, um, continues in doing a bunch of classified work around gravity, presumably. At least that was what's going on. So I find these people interesting. You wonder why Podkleinoff is not all in on doing more direct experiments on gravity, but maybe he is, or maybe he's some other motivation. Next slide. And then Frederick Alsvan, which you've interviewed before on your podcast, which I've watched with great interest, Tim, and good job there. But I think that his original science there and equations and perspective is actually pretty interesting in this dynamic nuclear polarization. Could lead to gravity control. Again, that's another key clue in my mind. Um, Hathaway and Dan Alsifan have collaborated on working on this with, as Hathaway said, ambiguous results. Um, so I don't know if it's going to work or not, but people keep doing experiments, and by Jove, that's good. Um, Next slide. Tim, you got the next slide? Ah, well, I won't highlight the book, but the book's there for getting what's going on, and you know, fluctuations of intense black body radiation influence the propagation of light signals, leading to measurable deviations in space-time intervals. So that's their core hypothesis. The question is how to test that in a robust way. Next slide. Hathaway's perspective on John Hutchinson. Um, you know, uh, I've read Hutchinson's accounts and familiar with a lot of the spoon bending work of Jack Houck and so forth. And clearly, the guy has, some innate mental psychokinetic ability, sort of a technical psychokinesis. Later in life, I think he faked some stuff, which lowered his credibility. Um, but did he really fundamentally have some mechanism that he could use his mind or some other technology to manipulate materials and metals, maybe not with a gravity effect, but maybe with, I'm not sure. But I find it interesting. It's again, uh, it's a it's another anomalous data point that may be totally linked to gravity control. Um, Next slide. And then you have the bismuth magnesium part, the Roswell part, which people, I mean, Linda Moulton Howe sold a couple pieces for like $30,000, and people are working on trying to figure out this bismuth magnesium, zinc, and aluminum or iridium. Apparently, the iridium atoms are spaced every atom over, which I don't know how the hell they measured that, but um, there's a line of iridium atoms. Um, and the rumor is a frequency, it levitates. Um, but, Hathaway investigated and didn't find any shielding. And but he didn't use terahertz frequencies, and there may be something to it. But I find it interesting that there's some opportunity there to keep investigating, and science will push along. But it's still problematic. Well, how do you make the damn stuff? And that's not, you can't just put it in your 3D printer and do it. So um, anyway, the jury's out. We'll know in a few more years, I think. Next slide. This is fresh and new. This was at the Dallas MUFON July 13th, 2024 Metamaterial Conference. Or actually, it was the MUFON conference. They had this big reveal. They put out a big press conference about it. Um, and apparently, the witness said it came from Russia a couple times. It's super lightweight. Um, and they used this handheld XRF, and it was calcium, iron, copper, titanium, but no graphene at all. And it was super light. They had it pictured on top of a flower. This particular picture is not the right one because I didn't have my camera going fast enough. But it was interesting to see that material. Um, so that was fun, and I. I find that interesting, but it's basically just a dielectric. I mean, you think about calcium copper titanate, which has a K factor of like 100,000, and maybe this new metamaterial has uh, uh, an equal K factor, but it's light as a feather, so it's dramatically different than um, other potential dielectrics, which might be associated with asymmetric capacitors and propulsion systems. Um, Next slide. So I did create this, custom private anti-gravity GPT. So I've taken, along with my other fellow cohort in crime, Chris Ekman, we've taken a vast number of gravity related books and journals and periodical, and um, train them all with a custom um, AI tool, and sort of had it work on a dedicated data set, um, and start to ask questions of it to better understand insights. Um, and we're trying to work on remote access so that maybe ultimately your team can explore what the tool has um, to say about a particular aspect of anti-gravity control and things like that that might be useful. In my real business as the CEO of Electric Fusion Systems, we've used a similar tool that's all trained up in fusion literature, and it's been highly helpful in just exploring quick ideas and getting calculations in many cases back that are highly useful. So, um, um, next slide. This is another interesting article by a couple of Italians. Quantum vacuum energy, gravity manipulation, and force generated. Uh, so I don't claim to understand it all, but I find it interesting that these people are working on it. And in that article, they highlight the next slide, um, which is this sort of asymmetric ZPF shape where you have a high frequency region and a lower frequency ZPF region, and it pushes the force forward. So, is this a clue as to how flying triangles that are in the UFO field work, or the pyramid shapes, or the ice cream cone shapes? Work as well. So anyway, I just find it suggestive that there's some clues there that are worthy of experimentation. Next slide. And then you've interviewed Brandenburg, I think, before. He got this 200K DARPA contract to write up his theory on gravity control and claims to have a 7% mass reduction in his experiments. But my comment to that is, well, if you got 7%, well, where's the scale up? Where's the next level? Why haven't you made one that's a hell of a lot bigger, better, fancier, etc.? And so I worry that there's something not really there. He talks about this vortex of pointing vectors as key takeaways, and I think there's something there as well. But fundamentally, it lacks mainstream validation. It hasn't been repeated. You know, the standard model of particle physics and general relativity don't support this. What he's doing, and but this is the usual diatribe they say to all of us who are working in the gravity field. Um, Next slide. And then, so, I go to this, this is my set of thoughts about what, where the secret lies. And it lies in a lot of these different um, aspects. And you can read down, and we've talked about many of them before. So uh, now the question is, in the next slide is now what? How do we take it to the next level? And move forward in the next slide. So I'm focused on interaction with magnetic fields, electromagnetics, electrostatic, high voltage capacitors, uh, and I want to use um, Michelson-Morley interferometers to measure the changes in speed of light, which are relatively straightforward. And next slide, to you know put your test apparatus in that and see if you can get fringe shifts that are dramatic or show. I mean, it'd be great to measure, mass changes and the damn thing got lighter or floated off the bench or on and on. But I think that realistically, you may want to start with this, or if it doesn't float off the bench, put this in place. Uh, Anyway, but you're familiar with that. Your audience is familiar with that, I think. Next slide. Um, so here's sort of my first iteration of an approach, and I keep evolving it. Again, I'm sort of new to this, but I'm doing my best. So I started with spinning permanent magnets with motors and Helmholtz coils with bifilar windings, and then I threw in some asymmetric capacitors in the middle. It may be wrong to have two. I may only have one. Might want to put it at 90 degrees. Um, and you can do. I added an electrostatic flap in between the Helmholtz coil and the spinning magnets to create sort of static electricity. So it's a combination of a Van de Graaff generator, Helmholtz coils, and torsional fields from the spinning magnets, and you can vary the winding voltages and currents and measure it. The test matrix on this is nasty as hell, and there's a lot of different tests that can be done to see if you get any responses. And the next slide. So here's sort of a picture of my workbench and work in progress, um, as you know, doing a variety of the tests using um, RC motors that spin up to 15,000 RPM, um, and I made some custom plastic holders. And when you start building things, it gets a lot more real. Next slide. And here's a picture of an asymmetric capacitor that I'm working on. I may make it actually the Giza pyramid, geometry, but in essence, you got to get the CCTO from China because the U.S. doesn't sell it really unless it's outrageously expensive. Uh, and, and just so everybody, the K factor is up to 100,000, and you can mix in. Um, Bismuth or magnesium, or well, bismuth most realistically, because it will sort of melt at a lower temperature, or when you press this whole thing together and sinter it, because you have to y- the calcium copper titanate is you sort of have to squeeze the shit out of it for like a day, 30, 40,000 pounds, 15, 20 tons. And then you put it in an oven for 10 hours at 800 C to sort of really cinder it all together. And then you hit it with a water jet and cut the shape that you want. And then you can start doing experiments with it. Of square waves and pulses, and see what you can learn about this weirdness of asymmetric capacitors. Next slide. Um, Here's another proof of concept one where I put a ring of capacitors up to 50,000 volts in series in the middle, with some bifilar windings or not. I don't really know about that. And then the spinning permanent magnets, trying to look at a different set of test things. This might be generating electricity as well, or some sort of gravity effect. Uh, or some physicist is going to call me afterwards and say, "You got this all wrong, Ryan. You ought to do this, this, and this." And so I'm open to that. But um, anyway, let's go to the next slide. And then, so sort of the final thing is, let's investigate and rediscover. But which is what Tim's been doing all along, is championing the whole reinvestigation effort and trying to get people to communicate and figure this all out. But I guess what I bring to the table that other people may not is the investigative journalism in me, where I'm going to get a lot of these FBI files, and I'm going to find and interview a lot of these people that know something. I'm going to do some remote viewing targets, as I've used those people before to try to understand what happened in the past and what could happen in the future. Um, and then ultimately, you can find the R&D teams in corporations. They're people, and you can start to do that. And ultimately, in the end, which is our goal here, is to build it and test it and prove it in a public big way, because this is the giant crime against all of humanity, is that we could have had the free energy and allow for an upgrade of water and food and energy and aviation, uh, and environmental control, and or not control but improvement, and move the planet from, where one third of the people are starving to death and don't have a high school education, to something far better. um, and so, uh, with that, I think that's the last slide, unless there's another slide after that. Oh, yeah, why invest? Well, I'm walking for ideas or investment, so, but you sort of knew that. Um, and I keep doing it on my own, because that's what has to get done. So